All right. I think it's going now. I was thinking we could start off. There's a quote I wanted to start off with because I feel like it's a good place to start. Um, and it's where he's talking about scripture and the role it's kind of played in the formation of doctrine. So what he says here is, really, on the whole, Christians rarely pay particularly close attention to what the Bible actually says, for the simple reason that the texts defy synthesis in a canon of exact doctrines. And yet most Christians rely on doctrinal canons. Theologians are often the most cavalier in their treatment of text, chiefly because their first loyalty is usually to the grand systems of belief they have devised or adopted. But the Bible is not a system. A very great deal of theological tradition consists, therefore, in explaining away those aspects of Scripture that contradict the finely wrought structure of this or that orthodoxy. Of course, David Bentley Hart's coming from his own system as well, but that seemed to me to really resonate in terms of like what the book's about, is trying to I don't know, come in and treat the Bible from a kind of different perspective, coming outside of some of this traditional Western Christianity point of view on this subject. I mean, what was your kind of take on the book, Shari, in terms of how it affected you and what you thought about it coming in? Because I know that was one thing we talked about, is kind of our own trepidations about reading the book in the first place.
Yeah. Like I said to you before, I was reading it probably with a presupposition that it was heresy. When I started, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to wade through it. Something's going to jump out at me and say, boo. And then I'm just going to run away, right? Because it's not the thing I wanted to see. And I also didn't want to confirm like my own, what do we call it? Confirmation bias, right? I didn't want to come in and think, okay, this is really what I want to hear, so I'm so happy that I'm hearing it, like that. I didn't read it like that. I read it more with a very skeptical spirit, and I highlighted almost the whole book. Like, it's just ridiculous. And every time I'd highlight something, I would give it a second thought, and I'd think, no, that's holding up. That's holding up too. And I would try to, break down the argument sometimes. And there was one part I don't actually remember anymore, that I didn't have time to prepare for this. So there was one spot that I thought was maybe a little muddy.
Okay.
And I can find it later and let you know about it. I don't think that it was theologically muddy. I just thought that maybe it was more of a, how do I put it? Like an opinion, and not necessarily, it's an either or thing. Like, well, maybe it's that, but it still could be this. But I don't actually remember what it was about. So I'll have to read that over and find it. But otherwise, to me, it feels really solid.
Yeah.
And that's all I can say.
I came in with the same thing. I was kind of certain sense of fear that, okay, that, like you said, that there was something heretical at the basis of this. And I was worried about maybe dislodging something in my own belief system because I wanted to accept this, because it's a weird kind of thing that's lodged into our Christianity. It's not something that's really talked about very much. And when it is explicitly talked about, it is very kind of odd and strange. But it's the kind of implicit fear of hell is really baked into, especially American evangelicalism. And sometimes, really explicitly was something like what was that thing they did a while back? Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames. Remember that? It was like a it was like a play or something that that was put on. Like a lot of evangelical churches did it, and it was kind of like to emphasize, you got to make your decision right now, where you're going to go when you die, and that sort of thing.
Watch the play, do the altar call.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so anybody that grew up in that environment, I think, feels like this is kind of like a cornerstone of reality, and where we're headed. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I felt like not having and one thing to be clear, I think too, about his point of view is not that hell doesn't exist, but that it isn't forever.
Right.
And that,
well, you know what, honestly, I never even knew that was a possibility, that you can burn in hell forever. I never knew that. Like, I'm 57. And it's like, wait a minute. Oh, this is good.
Have I ever
never heard of it?
Have I ever told you, Shari, that was a big part of my whole like intellectual deconstruction, was discovering annihilationism. And then when I studied that topic really in depth, because I saw this debate with Chris Date and this guy, I forget, and I watched his like 2-hour debate. And I remember thinking at the end, like, wait a minute, the one guy who made all these really strong exegetical points, because I came out of this really Bible teaching, Bible first, high view of scripture tradition, was doing all the solid exegesis. And I was like, but that's not, so he was the one who clearly made the best points and seemed like that's what the Bible teaches, but that's not the right view. And so then I went very similar to that, to you, where, and I, just to your point, I don't think most people know the history or like what is considered an orthodox view of hell. Like, it's just stuff that people don't know. We just take it, because really, like, eternal torment, the idea of this eternal torturing idea of hell is very much the water we swim in, at least in American Christianity. And even if you get into adherents of eternal conscious torment who hold to the traditional Western view, that no modern scholar of eternal conscious torment, or very few, hold to like the idea that's in most of the lay people. It's just amazing. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, I stumbled on it just by reading George MacDonald's Unspoken Sermons, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, what is he talking about here? Like, is he actually saying what I think he's saying?
Yeah. And to your point, Michael, I mean, hell is a Christian universalist believes in hell. Like, that's a common misconception, is people are like, well, hell's real. Well, Christian universalists believe in hell. So, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too that at least the English word hell, or what we have, it doesn't exist in the Bible. That's something that he goes through. It's just not a thing. There's certain allusions to judgment for sure, but there isn't like and there's many kind of parables, especially that Jesus tells, that kind of allude to what this judgment's like, but there's nothing like of this certain idea that we have in the Bible itself of, I guess you do have in Revelation, the lake of fire imagery, but which is where a lot of this comes from as well. But I was just thinking, I meant to do this before we got on the call, but it's not really, is it written into any of the creeds?
Hell? I don't know.
Not the early creeds. There are, like, I don't know. I know that it's in the Westminster Confession. I'm not sure of like, so Paul's, which is the British kind of Reformed tradition. I don't know if it's within the Dutch Calvinist strain specifically, because even in my first conversation of hell, when I was bringing this up, talking about my journey, Paul was quizzical and just like So, I mean, I don't know. He knows that really well. Like, he quotes from it sometimes, during what he was catechized with.
What about the Apostolic Creed and the Nicene
No.
Creed? No.
I mean, the closest you get is something like a reference to judgment, to judge the living and the dead, is what I can think of. But that's
not a problem.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no hell stuff. The reason I know this is because, like, they're in my so that one of the churches that I went to after because I essentially was just what you're handed as an American Christian is eternal conscious torment. And then when I became an annihilationist, I went to a church where I let the pastor know this, and it only became an issue because in their statement of faith, this is my whole first conversation with Paul. There was a specific point. They had 13 points that you needed to affirm for membership, because I wanted to become a member, and one of them was specifically about eternal conscious torment. And all these words matter because you can be an annihilationist and you believe in eternality. You believe in eternal punishment. This is something else people don't know. An annihilationist believes in eternal punishment. It's just death, which is a punishment that lasts forever. But the eternal punishing is a different. So I got into all of this because, I mean, I've looked into these things because they based their statement of faith off of Westminster Confession. And so it's within the Westminster Confession. It's specifically eternal conscious torment. But earlier than that, I don't think so. And I don't know Catholic dogma enough to know. But
Well, the Catholic, I don't either, but they do have purgatory, which is like, kind of a nice little compromise or something to that effect.
But I think they're universalists after Vatican II. I think all Catholics are.
I mean, from the little bit that I've interacted with people on the Discord that are Catholic, I'm not getting the vibe that they're a universalist, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So
I haven't just come out and asked, like someone like Carlos, because he's just a wealth of knowledge. But
yeah.
So what? Okay, I'm curious. What convinced you? So how long were you an annihilationist for?
That's when. What year would that have been? It was probably like 2010. No. 2011 maybe, or something like that. So I was probably an annihilationist until I looked into it for probably, it didn't take me long to become an annihilationist. I mean, just because I came out of such an exegetic, I think annihilation, from what I can see now, when I look at scripture, is like exegetically, I think it's the most easily illustrated through scriptural passages. When you do word studies and things. And so I was probably an annihilationist for about 3 years, but then really the truth is, I slowly transitioned from that and part of that's my whole evolution, understanding the Bible and how you approach it and how you understand knowledge. And I went to a Rethinking Hell conference, which is actually where I met Preston Sprinkle in the flesh. And I went to this breakout session because they are an evangelical group, just educating about annihilation essentially and the doctrine of hell. And so I went to their actual physical conference in Dallas. I have family in Dallas, and there was this breakout session with this philosopher who's actually, it was awesome. It was such a cool conference. It was just like a bunch of nerds, and it was great. But there was this philosopher who did a breakout session. I don't even remember the title of it. I should go back through all that because it was awesome. But he told me, and I believe this is true. He said, if you are by nature like a Bible person or a historian, and you grew up in the West, you'll be an adherent of eternal conscious torment, because that's just what you get with being. And he said, if you are more of an exegetical person and you really look at it and go through the arguments and really evaluate them and look at them, you'll be an annihilationist. And he said, if you're a philosopher by nature, he's like, you'll be a universalist, because it's the most cogent. And I think this is kind of David Bentley Hart's point. It's the most logically consistent, cogent, best story. And it's not like there aren't texts that point to it, I just don't think, like, if you're just taking it in like a very systematic formula, exegesis only, logic first way, annihilation is about the clearest to me. I always said for me the breakdown was about 80% of the applicable passages in hell, I think, lean strongly annihilationist. About 19.9 are universalist. And there's essentially none that are for eternal conscious torment. Maybe one in Revelation 2011, I believe. But
So I mean, what do you hold till now? Are you still kind of like up in the air in terms of?
No, I'm a universalist, and that's primarily just because I always used to say hopeful universalist until I heard in this book when David Bentley Hart was just like, just say it. Just say you're a full-on universalist. So I was like, all right. Because to me, I've just gotten to the place where I'm no longer kind of a rational foundationalist. And so I don't think you can know. And so like, I trust my hope and my intuition just as much as I do my biblical exegesis. And so I'm just like,
well, you know, that's actually what has kind of, so like my journey with God has always been, someone will tell me in the church, let's say theologically, it's this and this concerning whatever, it doesn't matter. They have their theological system to explain it, you know, and I go, okay. And then I read my Bible and I go, but what about that? Right. And so it's kind of, it's like when we first moved from Switzerland to Canada, I had to teach my two older children to read and write in English. They spoke English, but they didn't read and write in English. And so I had to teach that to them. And all I heard myself saying all the time was, except for when, or except, right? Because it's just like this language full of exceptions. Like, this is the rule, but you break it here and here and here and here, right? So that's what I was seeing. I'm reading my Bible, I'm hearing this stuff, and then I'm confronted with exceptions, right? And so I come to the conclusion that these people don't know what they're talking about. These people that are telling me stuff, okay? They don't know what they're talking about. They're finding a nice, easy solution that they can give me an answer to, but they really don't know. Like, they don't know, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I have this mantra, nothing is as it seems. That's, you know, when it comes to God, right? You think it's this, but then there's a verse that says, no, that's not it, right? And so what you have to do, or what I did, was embrace the ambiguity of it. Just say yes to that, okay? So it's like, obviously, and then I come across, you know, Paul saying, one day we shall know as we are known. And I go, yep, there it is. There it is. We don't know, okay? And nobody can tell me that they do know. And
that's a trippy, know as we are known. The one being crazy. Known is relational.
Yes. It's the thing that everybody wants. It's the I see you in Avatar, right? In the movie. Yeah. When they look at each other and say, I see you. That's knowing as you are known, you know. And I mean, George MacDonald does this great sermon on the stone, on the white stone that God puts your name on and puts it on your forehead, right?
You should share that with me, or tell me which one it is, because I've been thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, and that's who you are, and you don't know who you are, and God knows who you are, and he gives you the stone, and then you say yes to it because you know as you are known, okay? So you understand who you are for the first time. And anyway, why is it saying all that? Oh yeah, one of the things I really had trouble with in Revelation was the scene, right, where it's like, well, Lord, we were doing all these things for you, and he says, depart from me, right? And then these other people are just like, you know, slipping by, you know, not like getting out there and doing the Christian thing. They're not trying to rack up points or anything. And he's like, come on in, you know, I love you, right? You're blessed. And I said, okay, this is just like, why is this in here? And to me, the only reason it's in there is to say, you don't know shit, right? That's what it's telling me. You don't know, and don't pretend you know, because you really don't know, because obviously you're going to get up there and it's not going to be what you think it is. It's not going to be what you expected. You might be one of those people that says, depart from me, right? But what do you do with those people? Those people were working for the Lord. They were doing great things. They were feeding the poor. What do you do with them? What is it that they are missing? What is it that they don't have that they can't enter into rest with the others? Right? And so when I started reading MacDonald and David Bentley Hart, and the whole idea of burning off the dead wood and getting rid of your axioms, and your presuppositions and your expectations and all these things, I always have a visual of things. And so it's like everybody sees things like this, and God's like, no, you need to see them upside down. They're all the way the other way, right? And so off you go. And when you do, then, let's party, right? Let's have a great coming together, because how could you mingle those two groups of people together? How could you bring a group of people together who are just like in awe and accepting and embracing and are okay with the way it is, and then you have this other group of people going, well, wait a minute, that's not what my theology, and according to Bentley Hart, our personhood is not going to be removed from us. Our presuppositions are axioms, right? That the things that we carry with us. So on the basis of all that, that is what is speaking to me when I'm reading this book and when I'm reading George MacDonald, because to me, universal reconciliation is the only place where all of this. You losing us?
Well, you cut out for a while, at least for me.
Oh, it's the only place. It's the only place where the story of, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, and enter into my rest, where that story makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I read the book probably 3 or 4 times. And then also that YouTube video that I sent to you, which is kind of a condensed version of it. It's, the paper he wrote that kind of got the whole ball rolling in this direction, which he kind of built on in the book. And I was reading specifically to find things that were, logical flaws or things that I could kind of sink my teeth into as kind of a place to go against it. And I couldn't find it. And I've even looked online to see, what sort of critiques there are of the book that would be interesting. And
they're not interesting.
It was funny. Like there would be people would accuse him of being emotionally committed, to this point of view. And then, they would attack him for emotional reasons of their own. It was, I don't know. I didn't find anything really compelling in terms of a critique. And one of the big things is just his exegesis of the New Testament. He obviously knows the New Testament very well. And that quote I quoted at the beginning about, we don't really, especially in the Western Christian tradition, we don't really read the Bible to see what it says. We reread it to kind of reaffirm things that we already believe. We don't come to it to be shaped by it. We come to it to be like, okay, that fits into my system. And so, a lot of those texts, it's not like a few texts. There's a lot of different texts that say, that use the word all in reference to salvation. And even, especially in the book of Ephesians, I've always found it interesting that this idea of redemption isn't limited to humanity. It's the whole cosmos, right?
Yeah,
that's
right.
even in John 3:16, when it says God so loved the world, it's the cosmos. It's the whole of created order that is in some sense right now subjugated, and that will be in the future redeemed.
Yeah.
and he makes some really great points in the book about how you can't throw away some bit of it and still get the same story. It's just, I mean, he does it a number of different ways. There's like 3 or 4 different arguments in the book. There's the scriptural argument. There's, kind of the philosophical idea of what good is. There's even the idea of what is a person. That was the part of it that I found most really personally affecting, was what is a person? And we have in the West this idea of that you can be an individual apart from everything else, everybody else, that's a status that you can have. And he makes the point in the book that that's actually not the case. Like, your individuality is nothing but a sum of all your relationships to everybody else, and to take those away or to modify them in some capacity by, let's say, like, how could I ever be, a father who's in heaven and have my son be in hell and have, like, be okay with that? Like, what, I mean, would God, wipe away the memories? Would God, like, there's just not a very sensible way of interpreting that data.
So, sorry, I was
Go ahead.
wondering, because I have in levels, I haven't read the book, and so I'm curious just to pick your brain about it, because you've obviously read it 4 times. Shari's read it once. So I have, because the loudest voice in my head that's been formed, my spiritual element is a Calvinist.
Yeah.
So, which David Bentley Hart definitely, says strong things about in the book. But as you're talking, so, I mean, I've listened to a lot of sermons about biblical texts relating to all from a Calvinist frame. And I mean, there are things that are like, and this is true, but like in English, all doesn't always mean all, so that you can say that depending on the context, you can say, like, they all went to the mall or something, and you maybe don't mean every single person.
Right.
You're maybe just referring to something else. So I don't know if David Bentley Hart addresses things like that, or one of the other questions I had in my mind is that even like John 3:16, which is a great annihilationist passage, because it's, for God so loved the world that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. So there's a couple things. The word perish is in Greek is apollomai, which means to be destroyed, to cease to be, essentially. So does David Bentley Hart, so those 2 things, does he address the all question, but then also does he talk about why is the Bible written in such a way? Because, like, if you just read, seemingly for me, on its face, John 3:16, it seems like some people perish. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, he doesn't do that. But he does say that, so what I think one of the examples that clearly rings out to me is the one where it says that, I think it's in Romans, where it says, it's in the same sentence that he says, so that likewise, because all died through Adam, all shall be saved in Christ. So that's a case where you would have to change the meaning of all mid-sentence to mean, to be from everybody, meaning all humanity,
to keep it in like original sin, total depravity, and then salvation.
Right. That's one where, like, to me, that really hammered home, like, because I that's a lot of the critiques I've read online as well of his work, is that, hey, he's not taking into account, all can mean different things. But that's one where, like, okay, you'd have to make a pretty strong argument to say that, what are your reasons for this pivot, for it suddenly having a change of meaning mid-sentence?
That's 1 Corinthians 15:22. For just as in Adam all die, so also in the anointed Christ all will be given life. And then there's he does a whole bunch of them, and he's really facetious because he goes, well, if anybody needs a verse, there's this one and this one, or this one, and of course that one, and
Yeah, but you get all sorts of weird. I mean, the other thing that makes it so compelling to me is there's just so many weird things, you would have to, like, he makes the point that he doesn't think any of the people that claim to believe this actually do. That maybe they will
current in the torment, you mean? Who believe in the torment?
Yeah. He says,
I agree with that.
I mean, it's very, very hard to argue with that when you look at it just, I mean, on face value. Like, if you really believe that, like, how could you spend any part of your life not trying to rescue people from that?
Right. Well, that's a really great example of the huge deficit of an overemphasis on propositional belief is. Like, you say you believe in this hell, you don't act like it.
Yeah. Now, I know, and from the Calvinist perspective, you can get yourself off the hook for trying to go around saving everybody by saying, well, God decides anyway, so I don't get to, my actions don't play a role, which is kind of, I don't know. I really don't like that.
They would say it's a caricature of Calvinism too, but
yeah,
it is, but it isn't. It is, but it isn't, because that ultimately leads to that kind of behavior of being indifferent, in a sense, because it's outside of your hands. You know, like, it's not.
Well, you know, there's a good side and a bad side to it, because, like, you know, even, you know, Paul, he'll lean on his Calvinism when he talks about, like, why he doesn't have to be so he doesn't have to convince you, right? So that it allows him to be more open to other people and be like, it's not my job I don't have to win this argument to, you know, win my evangelical, you know, I say viewpoints.
Right.
It's God that does it. So so there's a positive element there, but there's a negative side as well. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is, he made, like, okay, so let's say, you know, there's some age of consent where, if you reach this age and you die before or afterwards, like, you go to heaven or hell, versus, you know, he says, like, how could you ever have kids
Well,
if
not
there's
only
a
that, but
chance that they might not go to heaven, like, they
yeah,
could, like, it's
and
almost irresponsible.
yes, and I remember that conversation that Luke and I had there a while ago. I was saying that everything becomes, you know, then they start making up rules, like, up to the age of whatever, you know. Well,
And you'd have to be pro-abortion, because you'd have to, like, that you're guaranteeing at least that they go to heaven.
how dare you?
Right. Yeah. Well, what I don't like is the arbitrary rule making, you know, because it's like, really, like, you're going to go there, like, you're just going to make up some age limit to who goes to heaven and who goes to hell.
Well, you have to, when salvation, because, okay, so, like, we began this whole discussion talking about, like, and you guys, you know, said you were nervous reading it because of the seriousness of hell, and that it might be heretical or might lead you down paths of wrong belief. But what I was hearing while you were saying that is embedded underneath that is the fear that, like, if I believe wrong things, I go to hell. But that is all caged within a framework of age of consent is the same thing.
Yeah.
Because this person has to be a certain age where they can rationally comprehend these things and believe the right stuff, and then that is what saves. I mean, that's not what salvation is. You know?
No.
That's basically my big project, is to argue against that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think one of, and I have heard this through podcasts, that the strongest case for universalism, I mean, you're never gonna, someone who's a biblical foundationalist and who's really keen on proof texting and who's fitting everything within systematic categories, you're never going to convince them through exegesis anyhow.
No.
And so I think the philosophical consistency of the whole thing as a narrative,
Yes.
and as a story, and as a system, that, because that's what I've heard through podcasts, is that's what he says, is that universalism is the only thing that, like, fits together completely without inconsistencies.
Yeah. And I one of the things that to me comes out of it too is, I feel like if you believe in heaven and hell in this kind of story, you believe in winners and losers, and you always are going to be motivated to be the winner, even if that being a winner in this new domain has some different characteristics, right? Because Jesus said that the greatest shall be the servant of all. So like now I can reinterpret my life so that I'm the servant, and anybody I see not being a servant, I can now say they're the ones going to hell. It's like you start to frame the world in all these weird ways, of dichotomies, as long as you believe in winners and losers. But if you actually see that everybody is important to the divine plan, that is of inestimable, valuable person, then you can actually act in the way that Jesus prescribes, which is to
Yes.
liberally sow your life into every opportunity you meet, because it's all part of what you'll be united to in the end. Like
Well,
it's
you become, at least for me, reading this and understanding it the way I think the way I think it's supposed to be understood is that you are part of a brotherhood, that this is a family, that we are all connected, right? And I mean, personally, I always thought that what God started in the garden was the project. The project was to be a family, right? To be together with Him forever. And the idea of being, the God man, or being absorbed in, the human and the divine becoming melded together, to enjoy communion with each other. That's always been my thought on it. It's always been the end game for me. Like, that's how I've thought of it. And I was listening one time. This is just an anecdotal thing, but I was listening to a CBC radio show about some Muslim man in India, and he was translating the Quran, because the Quran is written in Arabic, and they have to read it in Arabic, I believe, right?
Mhm.
Or they can't read it in their own languages. And so some people have their language, how when you grow up with a mother tongue, you're unable to say certain sounds because of your mother tongue. And that's where we get accents. So Indian people who are Muslim have a difficult time reading the Arabic properly. And to them, they feel like they are dishonoring God by not reading it right. Okay. So I guess there's some word, suffixes or whatever things in there that they can't say properly. And so this old man took it upon himself to translate the Quran into a form into Arabic, but he's developed some kind of system of writing out the words so that an Indian person could read them properly. Okay. And this whole interview, he was speaking in his own language. He didn't speak any English, this old guy, and he was just a simple man, and he started to weep. And he said that the only reason that he had done it was for the glory of God. And I started to weep, okay, when I heard that. And I thought, man, heaven is not going to be like, the landscape is not going to be what we think it is. And it makes me feel weepy just saying it, because and then Jeff reads his little excerpt from C.S. Lewis's Last Battle, right? And I'm like, oh, there's the guy, right? That was him in that excerpt, the old man in India translating the Quran for the glory of God, right? So that people could read it right and glorify Him.
Right. Well, and here's
and I don't want to sound like super like kumbaya here, okay? Like, I hope it's not coming across like that.
No, I don't think so. What I was going to just add to that is I don't think, and at least for me, and I mean, maybe you could tell me if I'm deluded, but I don't think you need to make a choice between believing right things and believing true things, and then also being in Christ, because I think you can have the good Muslim, the good Buddhist, the good translator of the Quran, Emeth in the last battle. You can have all that be in Christ, but it doesn't mean. I think one of the other kind of built-in water we swim in assumptions that we have is like all of the intellectual mental frameworks and categories have to be right. They have to be precise and figured out before you die, because that's what it's all based on again, right? If we study hell and it's the wrong thing and it's heretical, we might go to hell. It's all about having all the ideas figured out on this side of death. And I don't think what's interesting, huh?
What does that say though about God? You know, like about.
Well, but the thing is I don't even think that's taught. That's not even taught biblically. I don't think. Like, what I would challenge someone is like, prove that to me scripturally. I don't think you can. And like, even, you know, someone like Esther, who, and she said this publicly, who, you know, her and I probably view things, a lot of stuff differently. We're pretty close in a lot of ways too, but Esther has said this, that she doesn't believe that, I think Esther is open to, at least, or believes in like post-death conversion. And so like, we don't know how all that works, you know? And
No.
so I, as a Christian universalist, do I believe in the final analysis at the end, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, every knee will bow that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father? Absolutely. I believe that absolutely. Do I think that everyone who dies here that isn't acknowledging Christ verbally, because this is, and then people will proof text you, like, unless you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ, that's, I mean, we can go into the exegesis and talk about what confess means biblically in the Greek. It doesn't mean what you think it means as like a modern category. So, I mean, it's just, I want to put that out there, that I don't think being a universalist, and because I think people view universalism as wishy-washy. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you believe. And people think that about me because I downplay propositions all the time, and there's a reason I do. But in the end, I believe everyone's gonna have the right propositions.
If you're a Calvinist, you could be wishy-washy, right? About your axioms. You could be. What was the second thing you said?
I don't know.
Something about not following through, like just, you know, doing whatever you want, right?
Well, I think people think that, like, it doesn't matter what you do if universalism is true.
I mean, those things can apply to the other side of the coin, though, is what I'm saying. Like, that's because universalism encompasses everyone. It's just not a free pass, right? So,
yeah.
I think it matters more what you do.
I think so too, actually. I agree.
Because the reason being that there is no remainder that gets swept under the rug.
You can't pass the buck to Jesus through substitutionary atonement.
No,
yeah,
and
also like the every interaction you have with every other person matters, because it's a part of the divine unity in the end. You can't make the thing like, okay, well, this bad stuff over here happened because they were bad people, and you get justified in the end because they go to hell. And you're like, well, yeah, that's yeah, I'm right, they're wrong. There's this kind of playing out in our heads, like where we all the hard things that Jesus asked us to do, we kind of can provide the world in such a way that we never have to do them with real people.
Yeah.
And I've actually been examining my own heart and thinking, okay, what is the dead wood here? Okay, like, how can I skip the purifying process, so to speak, right? Like, what do I need to change? Like, I'm actually more self-reflective now than I was ever in my life, right? And
to be honest, from my own personal, there's certain sin issues and things in my life that, and this isn't like this, I'm not universalizing my experience either, but to your point, that was the same thing for me. Yeah. As a Calvinist, there were sin issues in my life that I essentially felt like I could get away with, because in the end, it didn't really matter what I did. It only mattered that I was judged righteous in Christ by what he lived and acted out 2,000 years ago. It didn't matter, like Christ in me now and what I did didn't matter. And I mean, I know they have frames to say like sanctification matters and you'll be living into your justification. I mean, I get it. Calvinists, you don't have to tell me the theology. Like, I know it. Mm-hmm. But it's almost more now. It's a very Jordan Peterson-esque. I was listening to Michael, your conversation with Karen recently, which was wonderful, brilliant, highly suggest it. But the Jordan Peterson thing of like the ripples of all the fact that your actions have this rippling effect that goes out and is interconnected with everything and affects everything is such a, and it's not like a it's kind of a yoke. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's a yoke. It's serious. You're taking your cross up the hill, but I think when you do it when you realize that it's all connected to the good, so it's good for me, it's good for my family, it's good for my neighbors. When it's connected intimately with goodness and beauty all together, but everything matters infinitely, it's not a debilitating weight. It's just sobriety. It's just like, you can't get away with this. No one gets away with anything.
Yeah, I feel like the various theological frames, whether it's Calvinism, whatever you call it, there's always a math problem you're trying to solve where, again, you get assigned to the winner category. You're
right.
you're trying to use your intellect to kind of get ahead of the game and predict where it's going.
Manipulating God and like his, like, if I believe the right things, then I'm okay. And then it all becomes, it essentially all becomes a game, which isn't, back to what we were talking about earlier, is that God, and this is why the whole crucifixion and resurrection really was an inversion of the world. I mean, this is what I think Paul is talking about in the first few chapters of 1 Corinthians. It's fundamentally opposed to the wisdom of the world. And if you think you have it figured out, God is constantly turning the tables. I mean, and Jesus in all his parables is turning the tables. Like, you think you're invited, or Paul's in the book of Romans, he's saying like, don't hope on Abraham that you're a Jew. Yeah. You can, he grafted them in, you can be grafted out. Like, don't count on your formulas.
Yes, exactly.
You can't, God is not mocked. You reap what you sow.
Yeah, you do. And in universalism, you do actually reap what you sow.
And this is, and I'm people, so then I hear like people are going to be going off on works righteousness. There is no such thing. It's panentheism. It's Christ in me. It's God in me. There isn't such a thing as doing a good thing apart from Christ.
Well, that's why acting as if has any substance, right? That's why it resonates with people, because people ultimately know that, like Jesus said, it's not what goes into a man that defiles him, it's what comes out of him, right? It's embodiment. If that's what you believe, then that's what moves out of you. That's the thing that you do. That's what you talk about. That's how you think. That's
belief as act as if. This is why Jordan Peterson matters. That thing is why I think he's so important.
Exactly. Yeah. And anyway, I don't want to get into sifting through, we're human, right? So we don't always, what's the saying? Do what I say, not what I do, or whatever, and Paul had the same problem, That's the dichotomy of being loving God and being human, right? It's, well, you can't always be what you want to be. But yeah, we talked about that one time in the voice chat about intent, and that is the heart, right? It's not the thing that we judge, it's the thing God judges. But yeah.
Well, maybe, and this gets into, I don't want to derail, we're kind of just going wherever the Spirit moves. So we could talk about the book, but I've been thinking a lot more about the whole good faith good faith argument. And I think this is a big piece within this whole Jordan Peterson thing and Joe Rogan and the IDWs. Everybody talks about free speech. Dialogues are what's important without shutting down conversation, these long form dialogues. But then it came up recently that these things have to be in good faith. And so what is a good faith argument? What is a good faith dialogue? And I think what you just said, Shari, I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think what you just said reminded me of that, which is like, do what I say, not what I do. And that's kind of a flip on what I think a good faith argument is that this reminds me of early on in Paul's conversation. I think he had a conversation with Eric, like Math Eric, who had the red headphones in his video.
Yeah.
And
makes the best memes.
Yeah, he makes great memes. Like the hierarchy Willy Wonka meme is excellent. But he said in there that a lot, and this is true. I mean, everything really fundamentally is built on faith. Dr. Jim said this in a video the other day. So good faith, I do agree that free speech is important, but not free speech in and of itself in just the intellect, because we're not rational creatures. What makes those conversations good is faith. And that's rooted in trust, and that's rooted in holiness. This is why holiness matters. You have a good faith conversation with someone when you trust them. Why do you trust someone? Because they're good.
But I think, like when it comes to the whole good faith, bad faith thing, it was the Rebel Wisdom guy said recently, he's like, nobody ever thinks they're operating in bad faith. Right?
That's true.
So like nobody goes into a conversation going, I'm going to operate in bad faith in this conversation. So he says, well, so what does it actually mean when we say that? I think operating in bad faith is actually when you assume the other person is operating in bad faith. Because part of so there's a certain dynamic, like you're talking about that trust. You can think of it as like there's in the trust game, like I'm extending beyond myself to meet you, and you're doing the same. And at any given moment, there's a dynamic quality to that where you're pulling back or I'm pulling back. And what happens is if we both pull back too far, that overlap breaks and it doesn't exist. So in some sense, to operate in good faith is to assume the other person is operating in good faith and to continue to extend that even in light of evidence that seems to indicate the contrary.
And even if they pull back, maybe.
So, if you think back to like the Jordan Peterson, Kathy Newman debate, what made him so effective in that situation is he continues to interact with her as if she's operating in good faith while she is very clearly demonstrating the opposite. Like she seems to be purposely misunderstanding him at every single point. And like it's almost crazy. And it's like he just pulls back and instead of like, he acts as if like, okay, no, you're like, you want to actually have a conversation with me. You actually want to know what I really think.
Yeah.
So I'm going to interact with you as if you really want to know what I really think. And so when you say something that doesn't represent what I'm going to say, I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to be like, no, that's actually what I mean is this.
Right.
And there were so many points in that conversation where it could have gone a different way. And I think that what was impressive is that he was able to do that.
And don't you think that this is an intuitive thing? You feel it. I can feel in a conversation when I'm having a good faith conversation when I'm not. I can actually somewhat, if I'm aware enough within a conversation, realize when I'm slipping into bad faith.
And it's also hard to assume the other person's operating in bad faith when they are treating you as if you're operating in good faith. If they continue to do it, even if you're like, butting heads and they continue to assume that, you're on the straight and narrow with them and like that you intend well and that you're doing your best,
Isn't it just listening to someone as if they have something to teach you? Like, isn't that good faith?
I think so. But I think the problem is that we take that axiom, we take that platitude, and then this is what I call giving the Sunday school answer. Like anyone in this Paul Vanderklay like little corner of the internet knows that rule, or most of us know that rule, and we would say like, yes, that is the way we should be in the world. But again, do we act as if? do you actually enact that in
It's
a
hard.
conversation? It is hard. It is very hard. And we're all so full of, pride that we
But I
have
think
these things
it's
figured out.
hard because we believe in winners and losers, and we want to be the winner. We don't we don't see the ways in which that is actually subverting what we really want.
Well, so, right. And this is just to use an illustration and an anecdote. This isn't to like praise myself, but I mean, part of this, I think I've just learned through my own experience. So I've been dialoguing with Sam, our good friend, Unitarian Sam, like through Voxer, because he has this debate coming up with Chris Day, the annihilationist guy. He's going to be on Preston's podcast, and they're going to have a debate about biblical Unitarianism and the Trinity. And so I've just been so I just told Sam, send me your thoughts as you're processing through this. If you want to, if you just want to process out loud, I'd love to listen to it and give you my thoughts. And Sam, he essentially, like he said repeatedly 2 or 3 times over the course of us doing this, just how thankful and appreciative he is to be able to process through these things with someone who basically is exercising Jordan Peterson's rule.
Right.
Like, am I Trinitarian? Yes. And I'm basically, and where Sam and I are a little different is I'm basically Trinitarian because philosophically it makes the most sense to me. And also because I just accept, this is where I've changed from being Protestant. I just accept the tradition of the church. And not so about proving it biblically. I actually don't think you can proof text the Trinity biblically. Like, I mean, and Sam and I talk about this stuff a lot, but it's just Sam and I have conversations with people. This is why Preston has told me this. This is why Preston likes to dialogue with me, because he can say stuff, even though his podcast is Theology in the Raw, to me that he doesn't normally say to people. And we really try to have a pretty honest conversation about things and say what we really say and think. It's pretty exceedingly rare, and it's a feel thing. Like, it's just, when you get combative, this is the way I always gauge it, I guess, is it's more the fruit of the Spirit versus the fruit of the flesh. So all those lists in Scripture, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, versus like anger, bitterness, resentment, backbiting, malice. In a conversation, if I start feeling these, like if I'm bearing the fruit of the Spirit in a conversation and I'm feeling love and it's flowing and it's good, I'm not even aware of it usually. But like, if I'm having a conversation where like I'm starting to get angry, I'm starting to get combative, and I'm wanting to score points and win points, we're doing that thing where you're pulling back from, it's tree of life, spirit of nature versus spirit of grace. You're pulling back into that nature, like winners and losers, and you're wrong, and it's a contest. It's a manipulated thing. It's a competition.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, you can only have somewhat or a more accurate judgment of that when it's a self-critique versus critiquing the others, and that's where we should always be concerned, I suppose.
It's hard to critique other people fairly unless, of course, they've asked you to, and it's concerning their work or something.
People are so different. Oh my gosh,
But like this whole idea of winners and losers, yin and yang, heaven and hell, right and left. We're constantly, we've got 2 parties, democratic systems that are just 2-party systems basically, right? And it just this pattern just keeps repeating itself over and over. And there's always one side, and then there's the other side, right? And it's what you're talking about in your good faith arguments is bringing those 2 things together in the middle, into a middle way, right? Into a place where, and I don't even want to use any kind of terms to describe it because then it just becomes political. But it's in the middle. It's a thing that's right, in the middle, and walking down the middle, and to me, this is what Scripture is constantly calling us to do, is to say, no, it's not that, and no, it's not that either. It's not the left and it's not the right. It's not the winner and it's not the loser. You know, whenever they ask Jesus about who's going to be first, he puts them at the bottom. You know, so
well, I think it's too, the thing is, we're also called to say and hold on to what we believe, to be honest with how we actually see things. Because you all of us, you know, we're on the same page with this to some extent, but we all still have this kind of unique perspective. And I think that's a part of this too, is that we can recognize that there's something each of us can contribute just by being honest. And sometimes, I mean, for some, that's easier for some people than others, because some people have more of a personality where they want to bend what they say to fit other people because they want to avoid conflict, and that's something I struggle with a lot of times, where I don't want to really say things the actual way I see them, because I'm worried that it's going to stir up some sort of problem, or like it's going to be a conflict that I have to deal with. But I think there is something in that relationship to the truth, and bringing it into articulation that we all can benefit from, if we assume the other person is operating in good faith, and kind of extending that hope and that trust to somebody, even when it seems like I think this guy's actually just trying to score points.
Do you think,
for me too, it's always been like, well, if I have really strong convictions about something and I want to say it to somebody, or I'm asked, mostly I do if I'm asked. I always tell the truth, actually, if I'm asked. But it's like, I don't have anything to lose, okay? If I don't tell the truth, if I don't tell them what I think when they ask, then I have everything to lose, because I'm not being honest with myself. Like, that's got to be the worst possible scenario, right? You're lying to yourself. What are you doing? You're trying to make somebody happy? What's the point?
I think lying to yourself, you're lying to God.
Right. And but then the other key to that is, because, some people can use truth to be hurtful, right? They can say things that are hurtful. Well, it's the truth, and that's not great.
Truth doesn't care about your feelings, Shari.
Yeah. The other thing is if you know that the person that you're talking to is a child of God, okay? If you look at them and you see them as a thing that God made with his hands, that if you think about all the verses in the Scripture that say, I knew you when you were yet in the womb, right? I know you, I see you, and you look at and you don't think about yourself in those verses. You're not like, oh, God knows, but you're looking at the other person and you're saying, that's who they are. They're his, right? He loves them. How can you not have a good faith conversation with them, right? They're his children. And
there's something that you're going to be united to eventually as well.
Right.
And this is why I probably push so much for like my whole, egoic intellect and more of like the feminine communication spirituality, is that, and this is what we were saying earlier, is that people don't really believe in this version of hell because they don't act that way. I would also say, kind of on the flip side of their coin, that outside of our egoic intellect that wants to win, that wants to have winners and losers, that wants to judge, I think we all have a way of seeing, and I think we all know this intuitively. Like, we all know this in our heart, I would say, like in our true heart, because we are icons of God, and we maybe have covered that up with a bunch of filth and tarnish and sickness, but truly in there somewhat, when you're looking at another person, it's like looking at the face of a little kid. This is why people love little kids. You just see instantly that it's an icon of God. I mean, you see through to that depth that it's a beautiful child of God. And if we could get I think we need to exercise our nous to get to that place more and more so. Like, I don't know if you guys remember, it was on some late night talk show during the last presidential election, you know, when it gets so heated and everybody's just like, either like, yay, Trump, make America great again, or yay, Hillary, you know, first woman president, and she's not Trump. But it was just so heated and so combative. I think one of the late night talk show hosts somehow found pictures of both of them when they were like 2 or something, and like put them up on the screen side by side of like little Hillary and, you know, little Trump, and everyone just, what I think we forget, and you get older and you start, like, this is what happens, like the egoic intellect takes over, and we forget everything is a model, and we start thinking our model is the reality, and we forget that child is still there. Like, the thing that you saw in that child is still there.
Yeah.
That's what the icon of God is. And if and I think if we all saw the world that way, every conversation would be a good faith conversation. Like, this is, so Michael, when you were talking to Karen, I don't know, I commented on all this stuff. I was just commenting as I listened through to it. So there's just like a stream of consciousness commentary from me. But you were describing the experience of sometimes when you're just staring at someone, you know, and it isn't a conversation, like say your dad or something, and all of a sudden something happens where like all your models just go away, and it's like you see them in a way you've never seen them before. It's just like you see them newly. Mm-hmm. And you were describing that, and instantly when you were saying it, I have that same experience. I know exactly what you're talking about. And to me, that's what, like, that is the experience of what iconic vision is. Like, when you see whoever you see, you actually stop, you see them as an icon. You stop seeing all the outside appearances, and you see through it. And that is the kind of vision that I am essentially trying to purport, that I'm trying to purport or say that, like, that's how we should view the world and every conversation, rather than the egoic intellect. Like, those are the two conflicting things, I think. And then you do, I mean, then you follow Christ. Like, you go in grace, you keep going in further unto death.
Well, see, that's what Jesus did, right? He had nothing to lose.
Yes.
He loved everyone.
Yes.
He saw them as children of God. That's exactly what his life was.
And he acted as if. He didn't just say it.
Right. Paul says, you know, you can kill my body, but you can't kill my soul, you know? So,
well, I mean, Paul said, I was going to say this earlier, when you were talking about winners and losers, Paul says in Romans 9 is where it is that I wish I was accursed. I wish I was damned by God for the sake of my brethren.
Yeah, you're willing. You're that willing.
I mean, he just...
That's what George MacDonald calls loving for the sake of loving. That's when the child sitting in the father's lap turns the father's face to the other children to kiss.
Yeah.
Right? And I love that, right? It's so beautiful. And that's exactly, yeah. I have this ongoing battle with my son who is like, it's because we both love to argue, right? and it's all good. It's like really good, actually. But we differ on some, you know, political levels, so that's been a bit of a challenge for me. And I've had to say at some point, okay, you know what? Let's schedule a conversation for tonight. We're going to have this conversation tonight after dinner until it's over. I'm going to listen to you. You're going to listen to me. And then we're going to go to bed. And then we're going to get up in the morning, and we're not having this conversation ever again. Okay? Because you're only here for another 2.5 weeks. And I don't want to do this the whole time you're here. So let's just do it. Let's get it done. And then we'll go have some fun. You know? And then he gets to listen to my point of view, and I listen to his. And it was, you know, it was great because I had to listen. I didn't want to hear what he had to say, honestly. I didn't. It was like blah, 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 right? But I listened. And same for him. He listened to me and he didn't want to hear anything I had to say. But we gave each other the floor. And then I often say to people, you know, in places where you're not going to agree, well, then we just agree to disagree, and it's okay. And you know what I find? Some people can't handle that. They don't want to go there. They don't want to say, oh, let's agree to disagree. No, you have to be on my team, right? It's the winners and losers thing again.
Well, don't you think to some extent, like, kind of what I was, even in that situation, if we have a good faith kind of iconic vision of the other one, like say with your son, that, or you could think of it just broadly politically, like pick an issue, like I'll pick a really extreme one, like abortion. I think you can, I mean, this is maybe too extreme for people to get my point, but
that's pretty extreme.
I think,
like,
right. But I think you have to get to the point. You really have to, unless you fundamentally believe the world is winners and losers and good people and bad people, which if you're at all familiar with Solzhenitsyn and this conversation and totalitarianism, you should know that's a bad idea. But you have to come to the place where you say, like, even with your son, what we both want the good for people. We both want the good for each other. People on both sides of an issue, immigration, both want, like, it's not like people who are against immigration, I mean, there's probably there's extremes in every side, but are just like hate immigrants. Mm-hmm. No, they love people. And so for somehow,
fundamentally,
somehow they love people, and I think the best way to love people is to have this issue. And so, like, even with your son, I think if you can come into the conversation like, okay, yes, all models are false, all ideas, all propositions never reach into that transcendent infinite category that Jordan Peterson's talking about, where the finite doesn't exist, that infinite thing that's transcendent of time. Propositions can't ever get there. And so forget your propositions, forget your identities. Like, what are you saying? Can I see through iconically to your heart that wants the good?
Yeah.
And what is that? And how can I attach that some way and, like, get through just like the superficial labels, like the thing that's underneath those.
Yeah.
Which is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and I think some of the thing is we neglect to understand the power of language, and how we're always, in some sense, always speaking prophetically, because, you know, in the propositional frame of mind, again, it's always about this kind of this eternal now. It's like this weird dead thing that's like we try and freeze frame it where. But that's not really the way language works, because language has all this life in it that goes in all these different directions. And whenever, especially when we're interacting with another person, we are prophesying to the other person. We're calling parts of that person into being or out of them, you know, and we can kind of choose which parts of that person to speak to. You know, we can speak to the parts of them that are you know, struggling and aren't maybe acting in good faith, or we can prophesy to the dead bones that aren't even alive of you know, their good faith, and say, no, you're gonna interact with me, and kind of. And I know that's like, that sounds kind of wishy-washy, but I think it's really true. Like, we forget how much power we have in a situation because it's weird. Like, anytime you're having a conversation with anybody, like, there's this weird thing that's going on where you're trying to assert your own identity, but you're also being shaped by how the other person's expectations of your identity are being relayed back to you. So you're kind of like, there's that negotiation that's happening all the time. And you know, if you assume and react to and call to the best in that other person, they will actually change shape in the course of that conversation. And you can say, well, it's all in my head, but it's a weird thing, because in some sense it is all in your head, but it's also, it manifests itself in reality. So it's this weird, you know, it's like I think it was Peugeot said something like, you know, what is a saint? A saint is somebody that sees God everywhere, you know, And
Right.
how do they do that? Well, it's kind of like this muscle that they get better and better at using. And you're like, how do I see God in this situation, in that situation, in this thing, and and I think that's kind of what you were saying in terms of seeing iconically. Something of what that is understanding the sacredness of all of reality.
Absolutely. You see infinity in all the finite.
And that's a big part of what David Bentley Hart's idea is. He
Yeah.
says he gets to this idea of universalism from the idea of creation ex nihilo, which means that all of creation has to be associated with God. It's all sacred, right? You can't. It's not like we don't believe that God like stumbled across some like lump of possibility, in eternity, and that's somehow constrained, or that he kind of worked with it the best he could do, but really it's like this dirty, nasty thing, and that was the best he could do.
Right.
Yeah.
No, he every last particular detail of the reality that came into being was of his choosing and design.
Yeah.
Is what the Christian belief is, and so you have, and by definition, then it all has to be sacred, and so it
That's
all has to have things that link back to him, and through which any detail, whether it's like some quirky scientific fact, it all has links back into who God is.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's why he can say that all creation reveals the glory of God, or also all creation moans and waits
Yeah.
for, right? All of it, not just us, not just the humans.
Yeah.
Everything,
I'm wondering,
everything.
how other people. Obviously, we're all fairly convinced in some degree. I'm kind of still in a middle space where like I feel convinced, but I also want to remain open minded. But I'm curious, what I would like to hear
An argument.
somebody like Paul or something like that really go like, okay, I'm going to really take this on and try
Yeah.
and give this some intellectual firepower from the other side. And I'm curious what that would look like, and um, I don't know. I'd like to hear it, because I feel like I don't understand this
But
position
wouldn't it
better.
have to be on the same, like, to make it fair, it would have to be a philosophical argument, like Luke was talking about. Like this book is it's a philosophical argument for universalism, in a sense, right? It's bringing all these things together and making them
A
stick.
good bit of it's philosophy, but some of it's just scriptural. But yeah, I would.
Yeah, but oh gosh, that's like opening a can of worms if you want to talk about the scriptures, because
Yeah, it's true. Well,
Because you're always coming at, you're always there. I mean, this is the postmodern critique, right? Is that people don't acknowledge consciousness in that, and so there's always an interpreter. Like there aren't just like objective facts and like these objective reasoners here. There's always a conscious interpreter of these facts that is laying things out in a story, which gets into the whole systematizing thing, which is like, and I can hear the textual pushbacks from an annihilationist view, because I know those really well, but then it all depends upon your story of feeding into that. So you almost, if you were going to talk to somebody about pushbacks from universalism, you'd almost have to like cage how you wanted that, because I know how the textual conversation will go, more or less, I think. And then I think, like, if I just had to guess, like someone like Paul would say, when it comes to, I think a lot of this really hinges on, so what you were saying earlier, panentheism and even some form of deism, because if you really see all of creation as this creation ex nihilo, where God is really intrinsic, has to be intimately connected and speaking everything into existence all the time. We don't believe God just spoke and then this thing had its own self-sustaining existence apart from his continual speaking.
Yeah.
That's not correct Christian doctrine. And so he's everything. I mean, this is why I love the book Notes from the Tilt-A-Whirl. Like that's one of the main points of the whole book is like all of this is words.
Yeah.
This is words.
Yeah.
Like everything is words. This is hard, but it feels hard. It's hard words. You know, everything is fundamentally words, but they're the words of God that are happening all the time. In him we live and move and have our being. And I think if you lose that, you fall into deism and dualities, and that's where I think the winners and losers, the heaven and the hell, you fundamentally miss the. And this is why I've always thought this conversation really comes down to fundamental assumptions about monism and dualism, and I think Christian monism is the true answer. Like ultimately that everything is rooted and founded in God, and God is all in all. Like I don't think there's something, I mean, I think there are distinctions between God and creation, but this is why I'm a panentheist. Like it's an energy essence distinction. That's the frame that I have for it. Because otherwise you have some kind of separate, otherwise you're a deist. I just don't see any other way around it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of modern Western Christianity is fundamentally deist in its assumptions about, you know, this kind of icky world that is so far away from God, and is, you know, Jesus is the life raft that, you know, we escape from all of this being burned up in the end. And it's kind of a good riddance kind of thing.
Right. And I think on that frame, this is to my point, what I think someone like Paul would say is that if there is this icky bad stuff, if there is evil, if evil has some kind of like ontological existence, which I don't think it does, I don't think it can, because again, back to the whole point of God, like it just has to be, in my mind, like an absence, like darkness is to light. You know, like even in Isaiah, I could proof text that, like, I am God, I am he who creates chaos. Like the word for evil in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it's like, I, God, create this. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that, proof texter? You know, like, I don't think you can. So I think in this deistic, dualistic mindset, you have to say there's evil. God has to wipe out evil or else he's not good. But then, like, this is why David Bentley Hart says, like, these aren't philosophically cogent. They don't work. There's inconsistencies. Then what is evil?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't deal with all these pieces. You have but I don't know. That's what I think he would say, but I don't think it's consistent.
Yeah.
He does talk about it. He does talk about the finitude of evil in this book. Okay. Do you remember Mr. reading it 4 times?
The finitude. Well, yeah. What specifically about the finitude of evil?
Well, I just liked his talk about how evil has to come to an end. Like it's not eternal.
Well, and the idea, basically, that you know, to know the good is to will it, right? So that in some sense, any sort of you know, what we consider freedom of will is towards the good, you know, and any sort of pulling away from it is as a slavery of some kind, you know. And that to me makes a whole lot of sense. It's hard to imagine a creature with perfect you know, understanding of both heaven and hell that rationally chooses hell, right? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see an argument.
Well, like you said, you choose what's good for you, right? Even if it might not be good for someone else. Ultimately, you're choosing the good. Am I understanding that correctly?
But it's you know, it's a short-sightedness, right? It's still a lack of something that causes you to, because ultimately, you know, what is good for you is to be found in God. I mean, it's
Yes.
kind of like.
But you're moving there incrementally through your choices.
Yeah. Well, the question is, you know, is God a being among other beings, or is God the ground of all being? Is he goodness as such? You know, is is goodness something he tries to measure himself by, or is it actually what he is in and of himself?
Yeah.
And if he is, then, there's all this, framing of reality that comes along with that, where like you to willingly choose away from good is not there's nothing rational in that, other than, we would necessarily say that there's a distorting, there's a twisting involved in that decision. And what's funny is some of the examples where people were trying to argue against him was, they made the comment that, well, in the traditions from the church, that the angels had perfect knowledge, and then they still could they could still voluntarily turn away from God. I don't see that, like that, how could you think that the angels could have a perfect knowledge? I mean, that to me seems kind of contradictory. Whatever,
Perfect in that they've seen God. I think
but
that
it's still not
bit of a
perfect. I mean, the only person that could have a perfect knowledge of the good is God himself, so any sort of turning away that they've done as well, I feel like has to be it's got to be some sort of short-sightedness. It has to be a slavery to something smaller than what is good. It's an enslavement to something other than that which ultimately satisfies. And I don't know. I mean, this is all very philosophical and semantic, though, but I'd like to hear an argument that makes sense from the other side, because I don't see how you can say, okay, well, the traditions say that the angels had perfect knowledge, and then just to extend that to being like, well, that means, you could have perfect knowledge and still choose not to. You could still choose hell over heaven, and that could be a rational, free choice that you could make, knowing all the facts. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know how you make that argument.
But then I don't know. It's
because he said it's like choosing to do something that will make you unhappy over something that would.
And we would say that person has something, they're deranged somehow.
They're mentally ill. Yeah. I think
he
uses some kind of example of a fire.
Yeah, he talks about, like, because he
putting your hand in a fire or something.
Right. Well, he says, like, saying that God is allowing for our autonomy by allowing us to go to hell is like saying, like, okay, like a father who has a mentally ill child is respecting his child's autonomy by letting that mentally ill child throw himself into a fire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's by definition both of the father to child relationship, but also of the mental derangement. He sees things that the mentally deranged child cannot, so that autonomy is necessarily weakened and distorted. And a good father has responsibility to insert himself and protect that child from its deranged autonomy. So
right. And the only way that even works, like, at least philosophically, the only way it makes sense to me is that if what it means to be a being or a person is to have some kind of an agency and some kind of an autonomy that is self-existent, that is apart from God, that he is not sovereign over, breathing into existence.
Exactly.
And if that happens, like, then Yahweh and the God of the Bible isn't God anymore. Yeah. And so, like, that's why none of these systems work.
Yeah.
Except universalism. They just don't make any sense. And honestly, I think my struggle, so this gets into, like, and then I'm probably going to bolt quick, but I'm just going to say one of my big struggles, and I say this to Preston all the time, and what is that people are very dogmatic about things that they have no idea. Mm-hmm. And like, this is my struggle, is that, like, and I think Paul would admit this. Paul hasn't read and looked into Christian universalism. He's not looked into annihilationism, and that's fine. We all grew up within traditions, and we can't know all, because information is infinite. I mean, you can't know it all.
Yeah.
But when you are exposed to other information, when you are exposed outside of your insular tribe to something, and you don't look into it, you don't assume there's something you may not know, and yet you stay dogmatic and entrenched, you're a fool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's all. Thank you guys for telling me and letting me participate, but I got a bolt and my computer's about to die. So,
Yeah. Thanks for joining.
but yeah, I want to listen to the rest of it. So, love you guys. Bye.
Bye.
So any other ground you want to cover before we?
Oh, well, we talked about a lot of stuff, not necessarily all of the book, but mostly about, in a sense, it feels like we were talking about why people have such difficulty with changing their axioms, right?
Yeah.
That's mostly what we were talking about. Because I don't know about you, but I think so. We've been changing our axioms
Mhm.
in a sense, right? We're in that process. And what I can say about that actually is that you do have a sense of freedom when that happens. It's like it's like somebody broke the chains, right? It's like you were just in this place because, like Luke was talking about, it's your tradition, or this is what you always believed, or you never heard of the other thing before, like me, and all of a sudden you're not adhering to that. You're not doing that anymore, or yeah.
So do you feel like you've had a complete transformational shift, or you still feel like you're still like in a middle space? For myself,
I feel a little bit like I'm in the middle of space.
yeah, I am too. Like I find the arguments very convincing. I still want to hear other sides of it. I think I haven't necessarily got rid of all that trepidation that um, that Luke was referring to, of like this sense of like, I got to get it right or else I'm going to fall into a big pit, which is going to lead me all the way down to hell.
Yeah.
So there's certainly some of that, but it's also, I want to have, be able to have a compassion towards other people's points of view and still maintain a dialogue with them.
Yep.
And there is something about David Bentley Hart's book that is kind of feels a little simplistic or kind of too neat and
Right.
tight.
For him even, right?
Yeah.
Like even for him. That's why I got this other book, A Larger Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm excited, there's a part 2 to it as well, and it goes through another history of universalism from where they leave off, because it starts at origin and it moves through time, right? And I'm excited about that because I want to read Origin and I want to read Gregory of Nyssa before I make a final decision, because David Bentley Hart is telling me about them.
Yeah.
Now I want to read them, and then I want to know where he's constructing his arguments, right?
Yeah, I think I do want to go to Gregory Nyssa too. I mean, I think he has quite a bit to say, and also, I mean, he's not like an obscure peripheral figure. He's
No,
a foundational early father.
Yeah, and this there's, just want to read you a quick thing here. I think that you would like. Origin of Alexandria, circa 255. This is this book, The Larger Hope. The greatest Christian philosopher, theologian, and exegete of the patristic era, is regarded as the founder of the doctrine of universal salvation. He embedded it in his theory of I always get this wrong. Apocatastasis? Is that what it is? Apocatastasis. Anyway. Or restoration of all rational creatures to the good. However, as I will show, he had important antecedents such as Bardasian of Edessa and Clement of Alexandria, as well as some apocryphal writings, and especially the Bible, of which Origen was the utmost Christian exegete. He himself declares that there was a tradition behind him when he refers to apocatastasis to when he refers apokatastasis to the universal restoration. The end is the so-called, oh, they're going to throw this word at me every 5 minutes here, apokatastasis, because then no enemy will remain. If it is the case that Christ must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet, but the last enemy will be destroyed, death. So what I wanted to read you here was, so some people have said to me that it's just Platonic, this whole idea of universal salvation, right?
It's a Platonic in what sense? Like it originates out of
it arises out of Plato kind of thing, and
philosophy. Okay.
And so that's how some people have been sweeping it under the rug. Yeah, it's just Platonic. It's not Christian. It's Platonic. But and that was, I thought I had it here. But she talks about, maybe I'll just send it to you when I find it. She talks about the fact that it wasn't. This apokatastasis was also a philosophical term, especially in Stoic cosmology. It indicated the periodical return of the universe to its original condition in a cosmic cycle. Stoic cosmology was articulated in eons, or great years that succeed one another. Each of these eons is identical or almost identical to all others, with the same events, the same people, and their same behaviors. The sequence of eons continues forever. Okay, now that's Stoic philosophy, right? The end of an eon is determined by conflagration, in which everything is resolved into fire, aether, logos, pneuma, that coincides with the supreme divinity, Zeus, Jupiter. And the latter each time it initiates a new expansion into a cosmos. So that's all Stoic. But Origen knew about that, but he explicitly criticized the Stoic conception of apokatastasis. It destroyed human free will by maintaining that everything that happens again and again and again. And by positing an infinity of the sequence of eons, it did not imply an end or telos to which all history points, and which for Origen is universal salvation. So anyway, I just wanted to, I'm just getting into that book, and it's kind of interesting because so far the only thing I've bumped up against is that it's Platonic, and so I don't have to listen to it because it's not Christian.
Yeah.
And obviously Origen is going to address that. So I find that interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that other people in Paul's community will read it, and I hope Paul takes it up himself. And I just feel like there's the arguments should be addressed or like at least engaged with.
Yes.
In a larger communal scope.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good.
Well, yeah, I guess let me know if you have any other thoughts, and we can pull this up again. But I feel like there's a lot more to say. I just don't know where to go at the moment. I feel like
I was kind of thinking that maybe we should pull up, a chunk out of one of his meditations.
Yeah. That would be good, because there's a lot of complexity, and if we went through the meditations one by one, that would be interesting, I think, and useful for people.
I'd like to dig in a little bit more to this whole personhood thing to understand it better for myself. So, but yeah, let's try doing that. Okay. Well, we'll just keep in touch over it.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
All right. Well, it's been great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the time, and I'll send you this link, and we can decide if we want to share it or not.
Oh, you know what? Just go ahead if you want to. It's fine with me. Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Take care.
You too. Bye.